First up, the assault and battery complaints with Kanye West and the rapper Da Baby. So, first off, there are two different ways someone can be held liable for assault and or battery: criminally and civilly. And so it's really important to understand that distinction, because there are different levels of proof you would have to prove. Obviously, in a criminal matter, it's beyond reasonable doubt, which is the highest standard. And so when we're looking at, Kanye West and the rapper Da Baby both being right now being accused of both assault and or battery, they're being accused right now in two different ways. So Kanye West right now is only being accused criminally as of now. But before I get into the law of assault and battery, let's just rewind and talk about Kanye's facts versus Da Baby's facts. So Kanye was outside a restaurant in West Hollywood and was just trying to get into his car. And allegedly, this was a paparazzi person. This wasn't somebody just looking for an autograph. And they really invaded his space. Kanye felt threatened, and so he punched the man and broke his nose. And so right now there is a criminal investigation pending against Kanye in Los Angeles, California, not a civil. So this paparazzi person has not filed any civil lawsuits that we're aware of at this point. And so this is really just a criminal matter. Versus Da Baby, again, a criminal matter is technically pending with Los Angeles police, because his assault and battery actually occurred at a bowling alley during Super Bowl weekend. So, of course, the police are still investigating that. But again, no charges have been filed, just like no charges have been filed against Kanye. But there's actually a civil complaint that's been filed with Da Baby, even if nothing criminally happens to him as it relates to the Los Angeles potential criminal charges. The civil complaint is not just for battery, it's also for assault. It's also for negligence. It's also for intentional infliction of emotional distress. And so, again, there's criminal and then there's civil. And right now, while there are two criminal investigations, one against Kanye for only misdemeanor battery, and then with Da Baby for potential assault and battery on the criminal side, but also now on the civil side with the civil lawsuit. It's important to understand that these things are separate. And also on the criminal side, that technically no charges have been filed. In order for a prosecutor to want to file charges against either one of these individuals, they would want to have to prove the following. So let's start with assault and battery. So California defines battery as any willful and unlawful use of force or violence upon the person of another. And then essentially assault is defined as an attempted battery. So attempted violence against someone, meaning you don't even have to touch a person. The minute they are in immediate fear of being touched unwantedly or hurt unwantedly, then that's considered an assault. You don't have to touch someone with an assault. And typically, assault and battery are charged together when a defendant attempts to injure someone and they actually succeed. So it's usually charged together. So in the case of Kanye West, he punched in the face, allegedly a paparazzi person. They are not charging, right now, looking into any charges of assault and battery, just misdemeanor battery. Whereas with Da Baby, it's assault and battery. So it's interesting what the cops and the prosecutors are potentially pursuing as it relates to Kanye. They can actually file the charges, reject the case, or call the parties into what they call like an informal office hearing, where they could impose certain conditions to make the case go away, things like anger management and things like that. So Kanye right now, like I said, only has something potentially pending criminally, and it's only misdemeanor battery. Versus Da Baby, I think, has a harder hill to climb. And so if I were a betting person, which I'm not, but if I was, to say if anything is going to succeed or proceed, it would most likely be against Da Baby, because his charges are both assault and battery on the civil and the criminal side, which, as I mentioned, you can sue for assault and battery both civilly and criminally, but criminally it's a higher standard to prove it. And so he's already saying in his particular situation that he was already being threatened online. And so when he, by his child's mom, child's mom is Danny Lee, or one of his children's mother is Danny Lee, who's a singer. Her brother had already been threatening him online. So by the time he got here to LA during Super Bowl weekend, they didn't know they were going to be at the same bowling alley. He felt threatened. And so, he felt the need to defend himself. Because he had already been threatened online. And so he's claiming self-defense. The problem is there's no video footage. This is all on video. There's no video footage of Danny Lee's brother, Brandon Bills, who's suing him civilly for assault and battery, amongst other things. There's just no footage of him swinging at him first or doing anything, at least in person, for him to have self-defense in that moment. You can't have self-defense based on statements made weeks or days prior. It has to be in the moment. So in the moment, it doesn't appear he was doing anything where he needed to defend himself. But again, that's factually something I guess you could argue either way. And therefore, because of that, perhaps the criminal charges won't move forward, because maybe the prosecutor doesn't want to get involved with a family domestic dispute, because this guy is technically family to him. He's the uncle of his child. And so that just leaves the civil, right? That's the civil is where you can come in. If you can't get someone criminally, you can get someone civilly. And it appears that Brandon wants to, has already moved forward with filing a complaint in Los Angeles. Again, same thing, assault and battery, just on the civil side. Negligence and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Now, negligence, you have to show that someone had a duty to you, they breached that duty, and it caused you some sort of injury. I don't know what duty he owed Brandon other than to not physically assault him. So not sure how well the negligence claim will stand. And then obviously intentional infliction of emotional distress. It's very hard to prove it. You have to prove the conduct was outrageous, that it was reckless, and it was intended to cause the person distress. And then as the result of that, the person suffered emotional distress. And you usually have to, with emotional distress, again, try to prove some sort of, that you had some physical reaction to that emotional distress. It may not be that difficult to prove this intentional emotional distress, because this man was attacked not just by Da Baby, but his whole entourage. This man was dragged by his hair up and down a bowling alley in front of hundreds of people. The video has gone viral, so he can even, claim that he has to keep reliving it. So I actually think in this case, it was completely outrageous that so many people would attack one man, regardless of what he had said weeks before. And so I do think he could probably show it was outrageous pretty easily. And so in that case, I think Da Baby should be considering getting the lawyer and considering settling this case, because I think there's at least more than enough here civilly for him to win on assault and battery and intentional infliction of emotional distress on the civil side. So we shall see. Next up, we have the disputed evidence in the Meghan Thee Stallion shooting case, where it's alleged that rapper Tory Lanez shot her in a dispute in a vehicle. I'm sure a lot of people have been following this case off and on. At this point, it's been almost 2 years. A lot of people are very confused as to what's happening. And so I'm going to attempt to explain to you what is happening regarding this disputed gun evidence. Obviously, this is still coming to any real conclusion as whether he did it or not. But I think we're finally getting a little bit closer. So let's just jump right in. So the latest was a hearing that was scheduled. Supposedly, the hearing ended up getting continued. But then there was this tweet that went out in the middle of, not even the middle, before the hearing even concluded, that DNA was not found on the weapon. in the Meghan the Stallion case, that allegedly no evidence of DNA was found on the weapon. A popular DJ Academics tweeted this. Now, I don't know if he's friends with Tory Lanez. He's sitting there right in the courtroom to have this information. He's not revealing how he has his sources, but he tweets this. And then, of course, Meghan Thee Stallion's like, court hasn't even really started yet. And I don't know why somebody would be tweeting something if court hasn't even started yet. Anything that's going to come out, it's going to be on the public record. And so she really comes after DJ Academics for tweeting this. And then there's some other journalists that kind of co-sign with her. I think one was from like the Post and someone else was from the Rolling Stone, both saying, at first, there's been no DNA evidence discussed in this hearing. It was just a continuance. But then they kind of, I don't want to say retract, but then they later go on to say, okay, well, actually, Tory's lawyer said that in respect to the DNA evidence, the LAPD has actually given them an analysis of the DNA, and that they're just going to go and do their own, get their own expert to basically further confirm what they feel like is favorable based on what they've already read regarding the LAPD's analysis. They're saying the LAPD analysis is favorable. They're just going to get an expert to further confirm that. And so it appears that something was discussed regarding the DNA. And so DJ Academics comes back and see, I told you DNA was discussed. It's clearly, I've looked at something that says that it's inconclusive, which again, technically is not the same thing as saying that his fingerprints were not found. But, he kind of went back and said, listen, I'm still telling the truth. Like, I'm looking at this with my own eyes. Again, I'm not sure how he's looking at anything, but this is what he's claiming. So he's doubling down. And so, of course, Tory Lanez finally chimes in and says, listen, I am being accused of this because essentially I was having sex with Meghan Thee Stallion and her friend. And even the text messages she has provided up to this point, where me saying I'm sorry have been held out of context. She's making it seem as if I'm saying I'm sorry that I shot her, but it actually doesn't say that. It just says I'm sorry. And he's saying that sorry is referring to him sleeping with her friend. And that, Meghan has now dug a hole that she can't get out of. And so as it relates to the text, this is what Tory is saying. He didn't speak too much on the DNA evidence. That was more or less something that the journalists and the DJ were going back and forth with Meghan. But needless to say, it appears that there's just a lot of he said, she said in this case. And again, prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And so if the LAP findings truly are inconclusive, and this is what his attorneys are basically saying is favorable to him because, again, they're inconclusive, then that means that it's not, beyond a reasonable doubt, even if Tory actually did it. And so it appears that he may, in fact, just get off with the technicality, again, if there's not enough evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And so far, it sounds like, again, even if he did it, there just isn't evidence beyond a reasonable doubt outside of Meghan's testimony that said that he did it, which again will be considered into evidence. So we will continue to follow this closely. I believe the next hearing is in April. That is the legal explanation up to this point in terms of the latest in the case. Next up, we have the sexual assault allegations against singers Chris Brown and Trey Songz. So before we get started, to help you kind of follow this a little easier, there are a total of 5 people currently complaining against both singers. So there are 3 people currently complaining against Trey Songz and 2 against Chris Brown. They are all actually being represented by the same attorneys, Ariel Mitchell and George Rebeck. And all of their complaints, for the most part, took place at different times in different places. And so that is actually a part of the issue in this case, is that, at least for Chris Brown and Trey Songz, that you have a lot of the people saying the same things about them at different times in different places. And a lot of times people say where there's smoke, there's fire. Obviously, they're innocent until proven guilty on the criminal side. But also, to be clear, as I made it clear in my explanation of other cases where you can file civilly and criminally, in this case, these are just civil complaints. A lot of the and even with some of the civil complaints that were attempted to be filed against them, they were, outside of the statute of limitations. But in terms of criminal, there've been no criminal charges. There are no criminal cases. This is all civil, pending against Chris Brown and Trey Songz. So I wanted to kind of make that clear in the beginning. So let's walk through these various civil cases, starting with Trey Songz. So Trey Songz has, again, currently 3 people, accusing him of sexual assault. The first one in March of 2016 in California, after party with a woman he had already been dating and already had a consensual sex relationship with, said that it turned violent, it turned unconsensual when he anally raped her in 2016. She's a Jane Doe. We don't have the name of that person right now. So that's March of 2016. And then in December 31st of 2017, New Year's Eve 2017, Miami nightclub in Florida, there's a woman named Jahara who is now saying that, again, she was raped. And so those are the first 2 cases against Trey Songz that are currently pending. And then just a few weeks ago, maybe at the end of 2021, there was a track star by the name of Dylan Gonzalez who then came out and said 9 years ago she was also raped in Las Vegas at a very popular hotel. And this should not be confused with a separate November 2021 allegation that the police are actually looking into. So her sexual assault complaint is something that happened to her 9 years ago. It's completely separate from a current Las Vegas investigation that's pending for something that just happened this past November, allegedly with the after party with Trey Songz. So just so that you don't confuse those 2 things. And so again, just focusing on the civil, you have the Jane Doe in California, you have Jahara in Florida, and then you have Dylan Gonzalez in Vegas. And so he's going to now be facing these 3 different complaints civilly. Obviously, he's going to have an option to settle and not take this to court, but he also has the right to take this to court. So it should be interesting to see how this happens. Dylan, who is the person who just most recently came out and spoke about this, said that she, was actually really good friends with him. And so she just kind of, distanced herself after it happened. But when she kept hearing about some other stories, she decided it was finally time for her to speak up. So this is, again, all alleged in what she's claiming. And so that's Trey Songz. Moving on to Chris Brown. Chris Brown currently has 1 case and then another case pending, again, both civilly. These actually took place the same weekend in the same place. So one woman obviously is claiming, the one that has already filed is claiming, she wants $20 million for being drugged and then raped and then, told to take a Plan B pill. And then her seeing him again and him trying to allegedly corner her again. Obviously, he wasn't successful, but she's claiming, again, a Diddy after party, something I didn't mention. Some of the parties that even Trey Songz is being alleged to have sexually assaulted people involve Diddy parties. So it's interesting that Diddy's parties are tied to the majority of the allegations across these 5 cases. But in any event, Chris Brown is being sued for $20 million from this woman who, again, said she was drugged and raped. And then there was another woman at that party that same weekend that said, hey, I can witness that actually happened. I wasn't raped, but I was given a pill. A pill was put in my mouth by Chris Brown, so I was also drugged. So she's not obviously going to be claiming sexual assault, but being drugged. And so, again, those are the 2 cases with Chris Brown. $20 million lawsuit. I believe even Trey Songz, one of his lawsuits, is $20 million. I'm not sure how much money as of now the other 2 women in the Trey Songz allegations are asking for. But either way, there are a lot of similarities. Same lawyers, same kind of amounts of money. all coming out of, or not all, most of them, coming from, Diddy after parties. So there's clearly a pattern here, regardless of what facts are actually going to be established if there's ever a case. Something I do want to point out regarding the sexual assault allegation cases with both Chris Brown and Trey Songz. A lot of times people say, well, why are they civilly suing? Why don't they want them to go to jail? Why are they only suing for money? Unfortunately, victims cannot make prosecutors in these various states, California, Florida, Vegas, all these complaints where they're being found. They can't make them investigate it, and even if they do investigate it, they can't make the prosecutor actually bring criminal charges against these people, especially when you have cases that have happened years and years and years ago, which typically happen in sexual assault cases. Sexual assault victims typically do not come out, immediately, right? So a lot of times it's the alleged incidences are so far removed in time that prosecutors do not think that they will be able to make a strong case, and so they don't think it's worth it to actually file the charges against these people. And so if you're wondering that is essentially why. I don't think any of these will come to trial. I think it would make more sense to settle out of court regarding these issues. But again, both singers have the right, if they feel like they didn't do anything, or they felt like if they did do something that was consensual, they do have the right, to see this all the way through.